Hey everyone, and welcome back to Moveless History, where we dive headfirst into the fascinating, sometimes uncomfortably gritty realities of daily life in the past. Tonight, we're stepping into an era often defined by its strict morality, its grand industrial advancements, and its seemingly proper facades, the Victorian Age. Think corsets, top hats, polite society, and a meticulous obsession with appearances. But beneath that veneer of refinement lay a truth that might make your nose wrinkle. The Victorians, by and large, stank. Not through any fault of their own necessarily, but due to a complicated dance between limited technology, prevailing scientific theories, and deeply ingrained social habits. So prepare yourselves, because we're about to unpack the surprising and often surprisingly unsanitary secrets of Victorian personal hygiene. Before you recoil too much, take a quick moment to hit that like button and subscribe to Moveless History, if you're brave enough to truly sniff out the truth of the past. And in the comments below, tell us what modern hygiene product you absolutely positively could not live without if you woke up in 1880. Now, dim the lights, maybe light a strongly scented candle for a bit of authentic Victorian masking, and let's explore why the age of progress was also the age of pervasive aroma. The water problem, a foundation of funk. The fundamental problem with Victorian hygiene, especially for the masses, was shockingly simple: water. Or, more accurately, the severe lack of easily accessible, clean-running water in most homes. While wealthy urbanites might eventually get indoor plumbing towards the very end of the era, the vast majority of Britons, Americans, and Europeans in the 19th century relied on communal pumps, shared wells, or water delivered by carriers. Imagine having to fetch every single drop of water you needed for drinking, cooking, washing dishes, and personal cleanliness. It was an arduous, time-consuming chore. And even if you got the water, its quality was often dubious at best. Rapid urbanization meant cities grew faster than their infrastructure. Rivers became open sewers, wells became contaminated by overflowing cesspits, and what passed for drinking water was often a diluted cocktail of industrial waste, human effluent, and animal refuse. This wasn't just unpleasant, it was lethal. Cholera, typhoid, and other waterborne diseases regularly swept through cities, decimating populations. The very source of perceived cleanliness was, in fact, a harbinger of death. Given the Herculean effort involved in obtaining water, and its often questionable purity, it's perhaps not surprising that its primary use was for cooking and drinking, not for lavish bathing rituals. The infrequent bath, a grand production. So, if daily showers were a distant dream, how often did Victorians bathe? For most, a full-body bath was a rare event, often weekly, bi-weekly, or even monthly, for even the relatively affluent. This wasn't because they disliked being clean, it was because a bath was a major production. Imagine a typical middle-class home. There's no bathroom with a built-in tub. Instead, a portable tin or copper bathtub would be dragged into the bedroom, often in front of the fire for warmth. Servants, if you had them, would then spend considerable time fetching bucket after bucket of hot water from the kitchen stove, hauling it upstairs, and pouring it into the tub. The water was used sequentially. First the master of the house, then the mistress, then the children, often in descending order of age or gender, each using the increasingly murky cooled water. After the bath, the process was reversed. The dirty water had to be emptied, the tub dried, and put away. It was a logistical nightmare, a true commitment that few had the time, resources, or sheer inclination to perform daily. For the working classes, a bath might mean a trip to a public bathhouse, if one existed and they could afford it, or a very infrequent scrub down in a basin with cold water in a crowded tenement. The concept of dry cleaning oneself was more common. A quick wipe down with a damp cloth, perhaps with some diluted vinegar or rosewater. The skin, however, was rarely subjected to a full, soapy wash. The masking game. Perfumes, powders, and posies. Given the infrequent bathing, the Victorians developed a sophisticated, though ultimately superficial, approach to freshness. Masking odors. This was the age of elaborate perfumes, colognes, scented powders, and floral waters. Rather than eliminating the source of the smell, the goal was to cover it up, to create a more pleasant external aura. Ladies would use rice powder on their faces and necks, not just for complexion, but also as a scented dry wash. Handkerchiefs doused in lavender water or eau de cologne were common accessories. Gentlemen used pomades for their hair and liberally applied colognes. The idea was to create a fragrant envelope around the person. Vinaigrettes, small decorative boxes containing a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar or smelling salts, were popular accessories, particularly for women, used to ward off unpleasant street odors or to revive oneself from a fainting spell, which, let's be honest, might have been prompted by the combined aromas of the crowd. The Victorian nose, undoubtedly, had a far higher tolerance for background body odor than our own. Their entire environment was smellier, dulling their sensitivity, layers, and laundry. The burden of unwashed garments. Victorian fashion, especially for women, involved multiple layers of heavy fabrics: wool, silk, velvet, none of which were easily washed. Imagine a typical ensemble for a lady: chemise, corsets, crinoline, or bustle, petticoats, a heavy dress, jacket, and outer wraps. Most of these garments were not washed frequently, if at all. The outer layers were brushed, aired, and spot cleaned. The real workhorse of Victorian hygiene was the undergarment. Chemises, drawers, and petticoats, typically made of linen or cotton, were the primary absorbents of sweat and body oils. These were changed more frequently, sometimes daily for the wealthy, and were the main items sent to the laundry. And what a task laundry was. There were no washing machines, no electric dryers. It was a brutal, full-day, manual labor process involving boiling water, harsh lye soaps, scrubbing boards, and immense physical exertion, often done by laundresses or domestic servants. Heavy Victorian clothing took forever to dry, especially in damp climates. Given the sheer effort, it's understandable why garments weren't washed after every wear. This meant that the lingering odors of unwashed wool, heavy fabrics, and layers of accumulated body oils were a constant companion, forming part of the distinctive Victorian smell. Think of your favorite sweater that's been worn a few too many times without a wash. Then multiply that by every piece of clothing on every person in the room: hair, teeth, and hidden grime. Hair care in the Victorian era also differed significantly. Daily hair washing was uncommon, partly due to the water issue and partly due to belief that too much washing stripped the hair of natural oils. Women's elaborate hairstyles often relied on unwashed hair for texture and hold. Instead of frequent washing, hair was brushed vigorously, sometimes 100 strokes a day, to distribute natural oils and remove dirt. Dry shampoos, often powders containing starch, were used to absorb grease and refresh the hair between washes. However, the constant presence of head lice, particularly among children and the poorer classes, was a persistent, uncomfortable reality, a secret struggle in many Victorian homes. Oral hygiene was rudimentary. Toothbrushes, while existing in some form, were not widely adopted or sophisticated. Most people used tooth powders, often made from abrasive materials like charcoal, brick dust, or cuttlebone, sometimes mixed with spices for flavor. These could be effective at cleaning, but were also quite harsh on enamel. Tooth decay was rampant, fueled by the increasing consumption of sugar, which became cheaper and more accessible during the era. Bad breath was common, and tooth extractions were often the only solution for painful decay, frequently performed by barbers or untrained individuals. A bright, intact smile was a rarity. Public sanitation, the great stink, and the dawn of awareness. While personal hygiene lagged, the Victorian era was also a period of immense, slow, and often reluctant change in public sanitation. Cities were overwhelmed by their own waste. Cesspits overflowed, privies were inadequate, and night soil, human waste, was collected by nightmen and often dumped directly into rivers or collected in vast, unsanitary piles outside city limits. The River Thames in London became a vast, open sewer during the infamous Great Stink of 1858, when the stench became so unbearable it halted parliamentary proceedings. This undeniable stench, combined with repeated outbreaks of cholera, forced a shift in thinking. For much of the era, the prevailing scientific theory was miasma theory, the belief that diseases were caused by bad air or noxious fumes emanating from decaying organic matter. While incorrect in its cause, it did, ironically, lead to the correct solution. Remove the stench, remove the disease. This impetus fueled the massive engineering projects of the latter half of the century, leading to the construction of modern sewage systems, like London's by Joseph Bazalgette, and the development of clean water supplies. It was a slow, arduous process, but it marked the beginning of true public health initiatives that would fundamentally change urban living and, eventually, personal hygiene. The very concept of clean started to shift from simply looking presentable to actually being germ-free. a paradigm shift driven by scientific advancements like germ theory, pioneered by Pasteur and Koch, that gradually replaced miasma theory by the end of the century. The perception of smell, a class divide. It's crucial to understand that the Victorian perception of smell and cleanliness differed from ours. Their olfactory threshold was undoubtedly higher due to constant exposure to a generally smellier environment. What we would consider an overwhelming stench, they might have registered as simply the smell of the city or the smell of the working class. There was a distinct class-based perception of smell. The working classes, who labored in factories, mines, and crowded tenements, who had limited access to water and washing facilities, were often associated with a distinct working class smell. This was used as a marker of social distinction, a subtle but powerful reinforcement of class hierarchy. The cleanliness of the upper and middle classes was often more about the cleanliness of their garments and their liberal use of perfumes than it was about daily full-body washing. They aimed for an appearance of pristine gentility, even if the underlying reality was less than sparkling. The Victorian obsession with moral cleanliness and purity often didn't translate directly into physical cleanliness by our standards, highlighting a fascinating disconnect between their ideals and their daily habits. A whiff of the past. So, the next time you watch a period drama or read a Victorian novel, remember the unseen, unacknowledged elephant in the room, or rather, the lingering aroma in the drawing room. The Victorian era, for all its progress and rigid social codes, was still grappling with the fundamental challenges of hygiene. It was an age of elaborate masking, infrequent bathing, and a gradual, hard-won battle against the pervasive odors and diseases of unchecked urbanization. It reminds us that our squeaky clean modern lives are not a given, but a hard-won victory of science, engineering, and changing social norms. Thank you for joining Moveless History as we dared to sniff out the truth about Victorian life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own pungent historical insights in the comments below. We'll see you next time as we continue to scrub away the myths of the past.